Alright, let me set the stage for you. Imagine this, you're 24 years old, living in your childhood home, trying to figure out your next steps in life. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. That's where this story picks up. I'm a 24-year-old guy, living in a house that's supposed to feel like home. A place where you're supposed to find comfort, safety, maybe even a little peace. But when you live with a narcissistic mother, those things are hard to come by. For the longest time, I had to keep my head down, avoid conflict, and just play along with whatever nonsense she was throwing my way. I never really got the chance to stand up for myself. She had a way of making everything about her and her needs. It's exhausting, honestly. But let me take you back to the one moment that changed everything. It was a regular Tuesday when she dropped the bomb. My mom came to me, that cold, calculating smile on her face, and told me that she'd moved in her new boyfriend, into my room. My childhood bedroom. The room that had been my sanctuary from her manipulative ways for years. Yeah, that one. I couldn't believe it at first. I mean, this was a woman who had never once asked about my comfort or boundaries, but here she was, casually rearranging my entire life without even a second thought. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't you just say something? Well, let me paint the picture for you. Growing up with a narcissistic parent means you quickly learn to pick your battles, or rather, to avoid them altogether. You don't rock the boat. You keep your head down, do what's asked of you, and try to stay out of the way. That's how I had lived for years. But this was different. I had to hold myself back. Because deep down, I knew if I said anything, it would just be another one of her infamous manipulations. She'd cry, guilt-trip me, and twist the situation so I'd end up apologizing for having any feelings at all. It was a twisted dance we had been performing for years, and I hated every minute of it. But this was a step too far. She was taking the one thing I had left, my space, and giving it away to some random guy she'd barely known for a few months. But that's not the worst part. No, the worst part is that she didn't even ask me. She didn't care how I felt. It wasn't like she offered me a say in the matter or gave me a heads up that this was even happening. She just did it. And then, she had the audacity to act like it was no big deal. She said it so nonchalantly, like I was just supposed to accept it, because, it's always been about her. Always. Now, my mind started racing. I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach, that mixture of anger and frustration that always came when she overstepped. But this time, something in me snapped. It wasn't just the fact that she had done it, it was the way she had done it. I'd had enough. I tried to stay calm at first. I mean, I couldn't just freak out, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized what this meant. Not only was she ignoring my needs as usual, but now she was pushing me out of my own home. It wasn't just a simple inconvenience. It was a calculated move on her part to make me feel small, insignificant, like my existence didn't matter. I didn't know what to do at that point. My whole body was shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. It felt like a switch had flipped. For the first time in a long while, I felt powerless and desperate. I had to get out of there. I had to get away from her, from that manipulative, self-absorbed world she created. But the question was, what now? I looked at her, this woman who had controlled every part of my life for as long as I could remember. She was sitting there, smiling, so pleased with herself, not a care in the world. Meanwhile, I was reeling. My mind was running in circles. How could I make her understand how wrong this was? Was there any way I could take back control without setting myself up for another one of her emotional traps? And then it hit me. Maybe it was time for me to take a stand. Maybe I had been playing along for so long because I didn't think I had any other choice. But what if there was another way? What if I could finally show her that I wasn't going to be her doormat anymore? I'll be honest. Part of me was terrified. I didn't know what would happen if I stood up to her. I didn't know if she would explode, manipulate me, or just make my life 10 times harder. But I wasn't about to let her walk all over me any longer. This was my room, my space. And maybe it was time for me to take it back, on my terms. As I stood there, looking at her, I realized one thing: she never saw me coming. She thought she had it all figured out, but she didn't know what I was capable of. And trust me, she was about to find out. Alright, so now the situation's already off to a pretty rough start. My mom had done it, she'd crossed the line, and I knew this was going to be more than just another forget about it and move on kind of moment. I wasn't about to let it slide. But honestly, I didn't know where to even begin. I remember pacing around my room, which, by the way, was no longer my room. It was the room my mom and her boyfriend had now claimed as their own. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The look on her face when she told me. The way she acted like I was being unreasonable. It was like I didn't even matter. And her boyfriend? Don't even get me started on that guy. He wasn't even a boyfriend in my eyes. He was a convenient pawn, someone my mom could parade around to get the attention and validation she craved. I barely knew the guy, and I didn't have any interest in knowing him either. I was a grown man, and now he was sitting in my space, my childhood space, like it was no big deal. I could feel my blood start to boil just thinking about it. I could have gone in there, screamed, made a scene, and told her how ridiculous she was being. But if I did that, it would have been just another emotional outburst that she'd use to play the victim. She had a way of twisting everything around to make me look like the bad guy. And I wasn't falling for that this time. No. I was done with playing her game. But I couldn't just not do anything either. Something had to change, and it had to start with me. The thing is, when you're dealing with a narcissistic person, it's not just about what they do to you. It's how they make you feel, like you're crazy for being upset, like you're overreacting, like you don't even have the right to have a real opinion. And that's the kind of manipulation that gets under your skin, day in and day out. It wears you down. But for once, I was ready to fight back. I just wasn't sure how yet. I needed a plan. A strategy. Something that would give me leverage, something that wouldn't allow her to twist things around. The whole thing had to be executed perfectly, and honestly, it scared the hell out of me. But I knew if I didn't do it now, I'd be stuck living under her thumb forever. I waited for the weekend. She was busy, as usual, doing whatever she does with her life, usually chasing the next quick fix for her constant need for attention. She wasn't going to be around much, so that gave me time to think. And when I finally came up with something, I almost couldn't believe it. But that was the thing, I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I wasn't going to walk into her trap again. I'd have to get my revenge in a way that she never expected. Something that would show her that I wasn't some kid anymore, some little boy that she could walk all over. No, I was an adult now, and this was my chance to make her feel what I'd felt all those years. The first step? I started with the little things. The stuff that wouldn't make her immediately suspicious. I began shifting things in the house, small changes that would confuse her, things that might make her question if her perfect, controlled world was really as perfect as she thought. I wasn't just fighting for my space anymore, I was fighting for my peace of mind, for my freedom. And I was willing to go all in. The first night, after everyone went to bed, I snuck into the living room and swapped a few things around. I switched the TV remote with the one from my room, nothing too obvious. Just enough to throw off her routine. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, on knowing exactly where everything was and when it was supposed to happen. The smallest disruption would throw her off balance. It was like a game to her, but now it was my turn to play. but even that small change felt oddly satisfying. It was like a little victory. And you know what? I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next day, I did something even bolder. I found one of her favorite magazines, the one she always left lying around on the kitchen table, and I ruined it. Not just a little tear or a bent page, no. I tore out a few of the most important pages, the ones she always went on about, and I shredded them. I don't know what it was about doing that, but it felt like I was finally reclaiming a tiny piece of my own life. It wasn't just about her bedroom anymore, it was about making her feel, even if just for a second, like she didn't have control over everything. I didn't stop there. I started digging into the things that made her feel invincible. Her social media? Yeah, I knew she checked it obsessively, so I started liking random stuff on her profile. Posts that were clearly from people she didn't know, photos that made her look desperate. She had this image she liked to maintain, and I was going to mess with it. It wasn't just about hurting her, it was about making her question everything. Her image, her power, her control, everything. But here's where it got tricky. My mom was starting to catch on. She could sense that something was off, even though I hadn't done anything too obvious. It was like the walls were closing in, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep up this act. Would she find out what I was doing? Would she confront me before I was ready? It was a gamble, and I knew that the stakes were only getting higher. The tension between us was building. She was starting to get paranoid, questioning why things in the house felt off. I could see the cracks in her usual perfect facade. And it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. Would she break first, or would I? Would my plan work, or would she somehow turn it all around and make me regret ever trying to fight back? Things were starting to get tense. I could feel it in the air, like the thick humidity before a storm. Every time I walked into the house, I felt like my mom was watching me, sizing me up. I could see the cracks forming in her perfect little world, and I'll admit, it was kind of satisfying. But I knew that this wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't just about some petty revenge. This was about breaking free. And I wasn't sure how far I could push her before everything blew up in my face. It all started with the little things. I'd noticed how she'd always leave her phone unattended when she was in the kitchen, so I'd swipe it, change her wallpaper to a ridiculous picture I found of her from her teenage years, complete with an embarrassing hairstyle. I knew she'd eventually see it. She couldn't resist checking her phone every 5 minutes. And sure enough, the next day, I saw her staring at the screen with this confused expression, her lips pressed tight, trying to figure out how that picture got there. It was just a small tweak, but it was like a needle, slowly poking at her. I didn't care if she knew I was doing it. I was making her uncomfortable, and that was enough. But things weren't as smooth as I wanted them to be. My mom started getting more on edge. She would pace around the house, talking to herself, making little comments under her breath. I couldn't tell if she was trying to convince herself that she had everything under control or if she was genuinely losing it. Either way, it was clear that something was happening inside her head. And then there was her boyfriend. This guy, honestly, I don't even know what he was doing in my room. Was he just staying there for a little while? Or was he planning on making this some long-term thing? I didn't even care enough to ask. But every time I walked past that door, I could hear them talking, laughing, or worse, arguing. He wasn't the loud type, but I could tell he was the kind of guy who always wanted to be the man of the house. And every time I saw him, I could feel this surge of irritation rise in me. He was just another pawn in her game. And the worst part? He didn't even know it. He thought he had a real place in her life. He was just another cog in the machine. So I decided to mess with him too. Nothing major, just little things to rattle his cage. I moved his shoes around the entryway, changed the settings on the TV to his least favorite channel, and, my favorite move, switched out his shampoo with some cheap knockoff. Yeah, it was petty, but it felt good. Every time I heard him mutter something under his breath, like, "Why is this thing so weird?" I felt like I was one step closer to making them both feel as uncomfortable as I had been for years. The thing was, I wasn't just going to sit back and let them take over my space without a fight. I had to do more than just annoy them. I had to make them realize that there were consequences to their actions, that they couldn't just steamroll me like they had been doing for years. But it wasn't enough yet. I needed to turn the tables completely. I could feel my mom's temper simmering, especially when she noticed the small disruptions around the house. One day, she snapped at me out of nowhere. "What are you doing? Why is everything so messed up?" Her voice was sharp, but there was this edge of fear in it too. She wasn't used to me fighting back like this. She wasn't used to anyone challenging her. I kept my cool, pretending like I didn't even know what she was talking about. "What do you mean?" I said casually, though inside I was practically bursting with excitement. She could feel it. She could sense something was off, but she didn't know how to put her finger on it. And that, honestly, was the best feeling in the world. But just when I thought I had the upper hand, she did something that made my blood boil. She pulled me aside one evening after dinner, her voice low but tight with annoyance. "You know, I don't know what's been going on with you lately," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You've been acting all weird. Like you're trying to undermine me. I'm not an idiot." I could feel her digging for an opening, looking for some sign that I was the one who'd been messing with everything. And the worst part? I almost gave in. For a second, I thought about just telling her the truth, letting her know that I wasn't going to let her bulldoze me anymore. But I stopped myself. I had come too far to back down now. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had me rattled. Instead, I just shrugged, playing the part of the indifferent son who couldn't care less. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice flat. "I've been doing my own thing. Maybe you're just stressed out." She didn't buy it, of course. Her gaze hardened, and I saw the familiar look of control start to creep into her expression. "I don't know what you're up to, but I'll figure it out. You can't hide things from me forever." It hit me like a freight train. She wasn't just messing with me, she was actually scared. She didn't like being out of control. And that, right there, was my chance. But then something unexpected happened. Her boyfriend, who up until this point had been a passive observer in her life, started showing signs of getting irritated too. One morning, I walked into the kitchen, and I could tell he was trying to hold something back. He was standing by the coffee machine, tapping his fingers impatiently on the counter. When he saw me, he shot me this look that was equal parts hostile and confused. "Do you need something?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just scoffed, muttering, "Yeah, actually. I think you're the one messing things up around here. You've been acting weird, like you're trying to start problems." I didn't let it faze me. In fact, it made me smile inwardly. He was starting to notice the shifts, the little things that weren't right. I could see the pieces falling into place for him. But what he didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. What I was about to do next, that would be the real test. But it wasn't just about him or my mom anymore. It was about me, taking back control, because if I didn't do it now, I'd be living in their shadow forever. And that was a place I wasn't willing to go back to. The tension had been building for weeks, and I knew the moment was coming. My mom was getting more and more frustrated, and her boyfriend, he was getting more bold, too. It was like the more I messed with them, the more they tried to push back. But there was one thing they didn't realize: I was ready for this. I wasn't some kid anymore. I had been playing my cards close to my chest, and now, It was time to go all in. One Friday afternoon, I came home from work to find both of them in the living room, talking low but heatedly. It was the kind of vibe that made you pause and just feel the tension in the air. I knew right away that they had been discussing me, and whatever they were planning, it wasn't good. I was about to walk into my room when my mom suddenly appeared in the hallway, blocking my path. Her eyes were narrowed, and her lips were pressed into that familiar thin line that meant trouble was brewing. "You need to stop," she said, her voice low and sharp. "I know what you've been doing. The weird stuff with my phone. The shampoo. The remote control. And don't think I haven't noticed the pictures. Enough." It was like she was trying to intimidate me, like she had caught me in the act and had me dead to rights. But here's the thing, I was the one in control now. The fact that she was coming at me like this meant I was finally getting under her skin. I didn't blink. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, feigning confusion. I could see her frustration mounting, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. "You're testing my patience," she hissed, her voice tightening. "I'm done tolerating this childish behavior. It's like you've lost your mind." She was getting desperate. Her carefully constructed world was starting to crumble, and she couldn't figure out who was pulling the strings. That was exactly what I wanted. But her next move? That was where everything was about to go off the rails. Suddenly, her boyfriend stepped into the hallway, his presence looming over us. He didn't look surprised at all. In fact, he looked more like he was ready to back her up, like a dog barking on command. "You think this is funny?" he asked, his voice rough and condescending. "You think you can just keep doing whatever you want without consequences?" I had to resist the urge to laugh. This guy, he had no idea what he was up against. He had been trying to be the man of the house, but he didn't realize he was just another pawn in a game he didn't even understand. "No, I don't think it's funny," I said, my voice cold now. "But I do think it's time for you both to realize something." My mom's eyes flashed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned in a little, my heart beating faster now. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. "It means that you've both underestimated me. You think you can push me around, treat me like I'm nothing, but that's not how this works anymore. This is my house. My room. And you," I pointed at her boyfriend, "are just a guest here. But you've got no idea how this game works." For a split second, there was this stunned silence. My mom's face turned bright red, her jaw clenched, and her boyfriend took a step back, like he wasn't sure if I was going to snap. But I could see it in their eyes. They were starting to realize that I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. "You're out of line," my mom snapped, her voice rising. "You're being disrespectful, and you're not going to get away with this." But it was like the moment her words left her mouth, something inside me shifted. It was like everything I had been holding back, years of resentment, years of living under her thumb, all came rushing to the surface. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. "You know what?" I said, my voice louder now, cutting through the tension in the air. "I'm done. I'm done letting you control my life. I'm done playing this stupid game where you pretend like you care about me. Because you don't. You never have. You're too busy trying to make everything about you, and I'm sick of it." I was so angry, so fired up, but I couldn't stop myself. I felt alive, finally taking a stand, finally saying the words that had been stuck in my throat for so long. "I'm leaving," I said, turning toward the door. "You can keep the room. Keep your boyfriend. But I'm not sticking around for this anymore. I'm not going to be your puppet. I'm done." I slammed the door behind me and heard the sounds of her shouting after me. But it didn't matter. I wasn't listening anymore. I was free. But what I didn't expect was that they wouldn't let me go that easily. My mom called me later that evening, her voice softer now, like she was trying to reel me back in. "Come on, stop being so dramatic. You don't need to leave. You're my son. We'll work this out. You know we always do." But it wasn't a plea for peace. It was a manipulation tactic. She thought that by playing the victim, I'd cave and come back to her. But I wasn't buying it. Not this time. "You've never understood me," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm done trying to explain myself to someone who doesn't care." And that was it. The line had been drawn. I wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. I felt a mix of relief and fear. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this, for the first time in my life, I had finally taken control. And there was no going back. Leaving that day felt like I was walking away from a lifetime of suffocating under my mom's control. It was like shedding a skin that had been tight and uncomfortable for years, but honestly, I wasn't sure what was next. I didn't know exactly where I was going or how I was going to survive without the roof over my head, but there was this undeniable freedom in the air. I had finally stood up for myself, truly stood up for myself, and that feeling was worth more than any comfort the house could provide. But that didn't mean it was easy. Not even close. I stayed with a friend for a few days, just to get my bearings, but I could feel the guilt creeping in. Was I being too harsh? Was I overreacting? Maybe I should have just tried to work things out with my mom instead of throwing everything away. The doubts kept swirling around in my head, like a storm I couldn't quite escape. Then one night, after a couple of sleepless days, I got a call from my mom. I'd been avoiding her for a while, but she was relentless. "We need to talk," she said, her voice unusually calm. I didn't trust the calmness. It was like a trap. I wasn't sure if I was ready to talk to her. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk to her. But the part of me that still wanted validation, that still hoped maybe we could salvage something, told me I had to take this call. So I did. "I know you're angry," she started. "But you don't have to do this. We're family. You don't need to leave over something so small." Small. She had the audacity to say small. My childhood room? The space I'd used to escape, the one piece of autonomy I had left? To her, it was small. She didn't get it. She didn't get how much it meant to me. How much it always meant to me to have a place of my own. "I'm not doing this for no reason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm doing it because I can't keep living in your world. You push everyone around you, you control everything, and I'm done being a pawn in your game." I heard her take a deep breath on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I gave you space, you'd be happy. I thought you'd understand." There it was again. The victim card. It was all about her perception. It was never about me. She wasn't owning her part in this. She wasn't admitting that she'd been wrong. She was trying to twist the narrative, just like she always did. And, deep down, I knew I couldn't let her win. "I get it," I said, keeping my voice calm, but there was an edge to it now. "But you don't get me. You never have. I'm not the same person I was when I was a kid. And you can't keep pretending you have control over everything." She didn't respond right away, and for a moment, there was this uncomfortable silence hanging between us. I wasn't sure if she was really processing what I was saying or if she was just trying to figure out how to manipulate me into coming back. But I had made my peace with it. She couldn't change the fact that I was different now. That I knew my worth. That I was no longer afraid to walk away from something toxic, even if it meant facing the unknown. "I'm not coming back," I said, my voice firmer this time. "Not until you realize that you can't treat people like this. You can't keep pushing everyone around you, and you can't make everything about you. There was a pause, then she sighed. "I guess this is it, then. You're really not coming back?" "No," I said, feeling the weight of the decision settle in. "I'm not. I've already made up my mind." That was the moment I truly let go. I wasn't looking for her approval anymore. I wasn't seeking her validation. I didn't need her to understand me because I finally understood myself. And in that clarity, I found the strength to walk away from the past I'd been stuck in for so long. After that conversation, I didn't hear from her much. She sent a few messages, mostly guilt trips, asking if I was sure about my decision, telling me how much she missed me, but nothing that could make me second-guess myself. The longer I stayed away, the more I realized how much healthier I was for it. It wasn't just about the room anymore. It wasn't about the little games I had played to get back at her. It was about freedom, freedom from her manipulation, freedom from the expectations she had placed on me my entire life. As the weeks passed, I started finding my rhythm. I got a small apartment and started focusing more on myself. My business ideas that had been on hold for so long began to take shape, and I felt more confident in my ability to make something of myself. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a person. A real person, with dreams, with goals, with a future. And maybe that's what my mom never understood. She had tried to hold on to me, to keep me in a cage of her own making. But by walking away, by taking control of my own life, I was finally free. Free to be who I was always meant to be. And as for her? Well, I guess she'll have to figure out how to live in her own world now. But I'm done being a part of it. I'm finally in control.